You wade through the dark surf at Slapton Sands, rifle-high wet wool dragging you down. It's April 28, 1944, a dress rehearsal for the invasion of Normandy. The Army chose this stretch of English coast because it looks like Utah Beach, the beach they'll storm in 5 weeks, so they have turned it into a live-fire range where real ammunition and ships replace the mock threats. So 3,000 locals had been evacuated from their homes and farms to clear the ground for a secret the War Department would kill to keep. The water is bitterly cold, and hypothermia sets in fast in water like that. And many of the soldiers wear their life jackets around the waist, strapped like belts, not under the arms where the manuals say they go. They wear them that way because the training skipped that page. By dawn, 749 of them are dead, 551 Army and 198 Navy. Most not on the sand, but in the water of Lime Bay. Hiding a disaster that size meant locking the files and threatening the survivors. The orders come down, say nothing, the casualty lists are sealed, and the survivors are sworn to secrecy. The numbers don't reach the public until August, and when they do, the dead of D-Day itself drown out the toll. More Americans died in this rehearsal than on the beaches of Utah on D-Day. How does a training disaster that kills more than the invasion it rehearses stay buried for so long? That question hangs over every page of this story. But before any of that, you have to understand the thing they were rehearsing for. The invasion is scheduled for the spring of 1944, and by the time the date is locked in, it has swollen into something no military staff in history has ever attempted. On the morning of June 6th, nearly 160,000 men crossed the English Channel. They are the leading edge. By the end of August, over 2 million Allied troops will have poured into France. But the numbers by themselves don't capture it because you have to picture the weight of the thing. The landing ships, the tanks, the 2 artificial harbors they plan to tow across the channel and sink into place off a hostile shore. These are floating steel harbors built in sections and dragged into position to supply an army that consumes ammunition by the ton. And the hardware is strange. Tanks that spin chains to detonate mines, tanks that lay their own bridges, tanks that swim. So how do you keep a plan that big from reaching Berlin? The Allies do more than hide Overlord. They mount a continent-wide deception, Operation Bodyguard, a deception plan approved on Christmas Day 1943 that convinces Berlin the main assault will hit Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy, while phantom armies threaten Norway in the south of France. Double agents pump false radio chatter into the ether. Dummy tanks bloom on airfields, and under Patton's name, a ghost army camps right where the Germans expect the real blow. But the whole enterprise hinges on a single cold fact. If the Germans get the real date and the real beaches, Overlord stops being an invasion and becomes a catastrophe. So the rehearsals are not a luxury, but the only way to shake down a machine this vast, to find where the moving parts are going to jam before the real thing. By late April, the final briefings are finished, the maps marked, the radio protocols tested, the loading manifests locked, and then the door closes. On the other side of that wall, the dress rehearsal is about to go very, very wrong. The radio order goes out, each hour is pushed 60 minutes, but not every landing craft gets the word. Admiral Don P. Moon makes the call himself. The first assault wave has already stumbled through misaligned timing on the beach, and holding back the second wave is the textbook fix. Except the textbook assumes every radio net is talking to every boat in the channel. It assumes the destroyers offshore have confirmation from every coxswain before they open fire. On a live fire range, assumptions are the first thing to burn. The second wave of landing craft kicks toward the shoreline right on the original schedule, while the naval bombardment, following its own timeline built around Moon's delay, is laying shells into the beach exactly where those boats are supposed to be in another hour. But the boats are already there, so the shells come down on American landing craft, packed with American soldiers. The geometry is simple. Trajectories calculated for an empty stretch of sand intersecting with hulls full of men. What happens next on that beach is a slow, grinding failure of communication. Not a single catastrophic order, just radio channels that don't catch up to ballistics already in flight, and soldiers hit the sand and find it shaking under friendly rounds. Some press forward because that is what you do when the beach is live and the fire is coming from behind. Some go to ground, pressing their faces into the damp Devon shingle, waiting for the shelling to lift, while the live fire targets of tank traps, wire emplacements, and bunker mock-ups become irrelevant and the exercise collapses into the thing no rehearsal is supposed to become. casualties without tactical meaning, and the rumors start before the smoke clears, up to 450. No one confirms it. No one denies it. The number runs through the ranks like current through wet ground, and you don't need an official count to feel the weight of it because men who climbed into landing craft that morning don't climb out again. The rest of the exercise pushes forward because that is also what you do when the machine is too large to stop. But something has already cracked. By nightfall, the beaches fall quiet, the survivors reassemble, and out in Lime Bay, a convoy begins to form for the second phase of the rehearsal. A column of ships with a single escort running without zigzag patterns into the night. After dark, the scattered landing craft regroup for the rehearsal's second phase, and out of the black water, a column of LSTs forms, brand new ships commissioned barely 4 months earlier, loaded with infantry and tanks for a pre-dawn beach landing. But they're sailing in a formation that belongs in a textbook of what not to do. A straight line, bow to stern, no zigzag, no weaving, as if the channel is a parade ground. Why they hold a steady line is unclear. Perhaps to keep a tight timetable, perhaps because someone assumes the channel is quiet. Zigzagging is a basic anti-submarine measure drilled into every convoy captain, and tonight it is absent. Protecting them is a single escort, the corvette HMS Azalea, small and undergunned for this kind of work. The destroyer that was supposed to be here, HMS Scimitar, sits in port for repairs, so the column moves forward with one thin guardian. The radios are worse. The LST's sets operate on frequencies the Azalea cannot receive, a gap the chain of command knows about, which means the escort cannot reliably warn the convoy of danger or relay a distress call. The moon is a thin crescent, hanging low, barely lighting the water. The sea is flat, and the straight-line convoy stands out as a clean silhouette, dark halls against a gray sky. Easy to track. But if you were standing on the bridge of one of those LSTs, you might glance at the horizon and see nothing but water. Yet the way these ships are strung out, no evasive pattern, a single thin escort, mismatched radios, leaves them dangerously exposed. The men aboard are rehearsing for the biggest invasion in history, yet out here they are vulnerable in a way no planner would accept on paper. It is a fatal flaw. The watch is not American, it is German, and the eyes scanning the darkness belong to men who have been hunting Allied shipping in the Channel since 1940. 9 E-boats out of Cherbourg, 6 from the 5th S-Boot Flotte under Korvettenkapitän Bernd Klug, 3 from Korvettenkapitän Götz Freiherr von Mirbach's command, ride the calm black water of Lime Bay. Their diesel engines throttled down to a murmur, which is how they first hear the convoy before they see it. The heavy throb of LST engines carries for miles across a flat sea, while the thin crescent moon hangs low on the horizon, spilling just enough light to silhouette the slow-moving landing ships against the water. And, of course, the convoy is not zigzagging, for the ships steam in a straight line, spaced at even intervals, as if the channel is a training pond and not a hunting ground the Kriegsmarine has worked with lethal efficiency for 4 years. So what the Germans are looking at through the dim optics of their bridge glasses is not a defended formation, it is a procession. Tank landing ships loaded with infantry and vehicles, screened by a single corvette that cannot speak to them on the radio, an utterly lopsided tactical situation. They split into attack pairs, Rate 3, Rate 2, Rate 1, and the 3 boats from von Mirbach's flotilla slide into the formation with the ease of crews who have hunted these waters for years. Now the throttles go forward. The diesels wind up from a mutter to a full-throated roar, Mercedes-Benz engines pushing 39 knots, and the E-boats lift their bows out of the water, white wake churning behind them, the crews bracing against the spray. A Schnell boat at attack speed is built for it. A narrow hull, a low silhouette, and a pair of 533mm torpedo tubes angled forward. The boats close the distance faster than any Allied lookout can process. What do you do when the horizon you are watching is suddenly full of knife-bowed shapes coming at you at highway speed in the dark? You do not have time to do much at all. Klug's flotilla and von Mirbach's boats work the convoy from multiple angles, and the attack is brutally simple. Close the range, fire into the slowest, largest targets, then turn hard into the darkness before the escorts can respond, and the torpedoes slide from their tubes with a pneumatic hiss and hit the water running. Their electric motors driving them toward the hulls of American landing ships that were never designed to take a hit below the waterline. The tracks of the torpedoes are invisible in the black water. The G7E leaves no bubble trail, only a pressure wave that no one aboard the LSTs can feel until it is far too late. You can imagine the sound, perhaps. A low thrum through the steel plates, a vibration that might register as wrong in the seconds before the warhead finds its mark. But by the time the sound registers, the torpedo has already crossed the final meters. The first explosion would turn a training exercise into an inferno. At 2:03 on 28 April, a torpedo from a German E-boat strikes LST-507 just forward of the stern, at the auxiliary engine room, and the ship heaves with the force of the blast. The lights die instantly, the steel decks flex, and a cloud of choking dust and pulverized insulation fills every compartment, turning the familiar below decks into a dark, howling labyrinth. And then the fire comes. She carries 22 DUKWs with full gasoline tanks and trucks, with 8 Army units aboard, all of it sitting in the open tank deck. The torpedo has ruptured fuel lines and sparked a blaze that races upward fast. Flames spread across the vehicle deck, hot enough to melt aluminum and set ammunition cooking off, rounds skittering across the steel. Men who were sleeping below wake to fire overhead. A medical officer, Eugene Exton, later describes the sensation. A boom, a violent thrust that hurls him through the air, then the dark and the crunching metal. The air turns to dust, the smell of burning rubber and paint filling his lungs, and in the blackness, he can hear other men, but cannot see them. Somebody, an officer or just a man with enough breath, yells the order to abandon ship. And the word spreads up the ladders, across the glowing deck where sailors and soldiers scramble for the nets. So they go over the side, down the nets hanging over the gunwales, into the cold water, scrambling to strap on life jackets that, for so many, go around the waist instead of under the arms. Worn that way, the jackets flip a man face down. When the casualty lists are finally compiled, the dead aboard LST-507 number 202, not the 424 that some later accounts mistakenly assigned to this hull, a confusion born in the chaos of the same hour. 202 soldiers and sailors killed by the blast, the fire, or the cold. Yet the ship herself does not sink immediately. She burns through the night, her bow still afloat, a beacon on the black water that draws prowling E-boats in the anxious eye of the escort. By dawn, a British destroyer puts a few rounds into the hull and the bow slips under. But the attack was only beginning. Nearby, another ship was already fatally struck. But the E-boats have not finished. They still prowl the bay, and their next target is already burning a silhouette on the horizon. LST-531 is nearly identical to her sister ship, a flat-bottomed landing vessel, 328 feet long, loaded with troops and vehicles. And when the torpedo slams into her hull at 217, the effect is immediate. The explosion tears her open and fire spreads fast down through the troop compartments below. Which means the men who survive the initial blast face exactly the same impossible choice as their comrades on 507. Stay in the fire or enter the water. And most of them are already trapped. The ship is listing hard almost before the echo of the explosion fades. Bulkheads buckle, the deck tilts past 20 degrees within 2 minutes, and survivor accounts describe a vessel that could not be saved. The flooding too rapid and the fire too intense to fight. Of the 496 men who boarded LST-531 that night, 424 are confirmed dead, and she sinks in under 6 minutes. Now, there is a persistent story that LST-289 was struck by friendly fire from LST-511 during the chaos of the night, that her crew saw muzzle flashes in the dark and assumed American guns were the source of their damage. But the evidence is clear that the torpedo that hit 289 came from an E-boat. It struck her stern, destroying the rudder and crew quarters and killing members of her crew. She does not sink, but she is crippled, unable to steer, drifting with survivors aboard, and the damage reports are unambiguous. A G7E torpedo leaves a signature that friendly 40mm fire cannot replicate. The U.S. Navy investigators knew what they were looking at, but what they did with that knowledge is a matter for later. So, in the space of less than half an hour, one LST is on the bottom, one is a burning wreck still adrift, and a third is dead in the water with her back broken. The E-boats melt into the dark, their work done. Not a shot fired from the escort. HMS Azalea still cannot reach the convoy on the radio. What passes for a rescue effort is already scrambling, but most of the men who are going to die are not aboard ship anymore. They are in the water. And the water does not care about E-boats or faulty radios or botched communication protocols, because it has its own physics and its own timetable. This was not an accident. It was a disaster enabled by multiple points of failure, and for the men now in the water off Slapton Sands, the deadliest thing in Lime Bay has not yet done its work. The men who spill from the burning transports find no surface to rest on, only cold open water. In water that cold, hypothermia sets in within minutes, and a man can keep himself moving for only a short time before the cold takes his strength. And the flotation they were issued compounds the mistake. The life preserver has a collar built to keep a man's head up, but almost every soldier has it cinched around his waist, where a belt would go, because the manuals stayed in crates on the docks and the NCOs never drilled the proper fit. When they hit the water, the vest rides up and flips them face down, so a man who might have floated is instead held under by the buoyancy that was meant to save him. For many, that alone is fatal. Cold like that shuts the body down in stages. Fine motor control fails, then the deep shivering, then a heavy fatal calm. A man cannot last long, and one by one, the channel takes them. Some men tread water for hours in the dark before a rescue ship reaches them. When LST-515 finally comes about and puts its nets over the side, the hands that haul survivors aboard pull up only the lucky few. When first light arrives, the bay is a flat gray mirror, and the counting begins, not in numbers yet, but in absences. The squad that doesn't answer, the company that never forms up on the beach. And there is something worse than the dead, for among them were men who carried a secret that could change the course of the war, and they were missing. As the gray light hardens over Lime Bay, the living drag the dead from the surf. But the count that matters most runs through a column on a clipboard that a colonel keeps running his finger down. And by midday, that finger stops at a set of names that shouldn't be on any casualty roster. 10 men are gone from the list, and these are names that come with a red stamp in a locked file. That stamp is BIGOT. Those men know the beaches, know the timing, know which divisions hit Utah and which hit Omaha. Know the fake army parked in Kent that is supposed to fool Berlin. Each of those 10 men holds knowledge that in enemy hands could compromise the entire invasion. Now, you might think this sounds like a thriller with a deadline that never was, but the after-action logs from April 28th, typed up aboard a frigate in the aftermath, list the absences without melodrama. 10 officers with BIGOT clearance unaccounted for. And what follows is not a rescue operation in the normal sense, because the boats that can still float push back across the bay with a priority that has nothing to do with mercy. They are fishing for a secret. For hours, rescue crews scan the debris fields and call out names across the cold water. Meanwhile, the clock is running. If the E-boats pulled even one of these men from the water, Overlord could be compromised before it begins. The Germans handed the real beaches, the real date, the real scale. But one by one, the 10 are accounted for, some found alive and able to confirm that they spoke to no one, the rest recovered from the bay. Their silence is the one thing that works in the Allies' favor. In time, all 10 are on the ledger, accounted for, secure, or beyond interrogation. For a time, the secrecy of the entire invasion plan hung on whether any of those men had fallen into German hands. None had. The immediate danger had passed. An order comes down from Schaeff. The exercise is classified, and every soldier and sailor who survived is to be rounded up, debriefed, and silenced under the full weight of military law. But the men from LST-289 get more pointed treatment. They are assembled and told that if they speak of what they saw, they will face a court-martial. Because the invasion plan, codenamed Overlord, is scheduled for early June, and if the Germans learn that the Allies just lost a rehearsal this badly, they might guess where and how. So the forms come out, and one by one the men sign their names to a promise to forget. The real count of the dead does not appear on any official paper that month. The figures are sealed along with the rest of the exercise, and the families back home are told nothing of it, not at the time. So the Allied High Command does not engineer a sophisticated cover-up. It simply shuts the lid and waits for the next louder story to drown this one out, and the survivors carry the weight of that silence for years. For some, it will take decades before they can speak, and even then, the official record will have already written them into a footnote. So the men sign. The pen scratches across the page, and the silence locks into place. But the numbers don't dissolve into the channel. They surface slowly through the layers of classification, and when the casualty figures finally land on paper in August 1944, the breakdown is precise, uneven, and revealing. Of the 749 Americans who died that night in Lime Bay, 551 belonged to the Army, infantrymen, engineers, Signal Corps, artillery observers, men who were supposed to walk onto Utah Beach in June, and instead never left the English coast. The Army lost more than a battalion's worth of combat troops before they ever saw France. That number matters because of what it represents. A standard infantry battalion in 1944 fields roughly 860 men. So Exercise Tiger cost the Army close to the fighting strength of a full battalion, lost in minutes of torpedo impact and an hour in the cold. And these were not untrained replacements. They were the assault echelon, the men who had rehearsed the beach landings for months. The Navy loses 198 sailors. Engineers, landing craft crews, and gun crews stayed at their stations as the LSTs burned, and the Navy's dead come disproportionately from below decks. The engine rooms and damage control parties, men trapped when hatches jammed or fire cut off their escape. Many of the dead were not killed by the torpedoes at all. They drowned or died of hypothermia in the water before rescue could reach them, the life jackets worn wrong, the cold doing what the explosions had not. And when you add it all up, the rehearsal at Slapton Sands killed more American soldiers in a single night than the actual assault on certain D-Day beaches. The practice run extracted a heavier price in that one stretch of water than the real thing would demand from some of the landing zones 7 weeks later. So the numbers go into the report, get stamped, filed, and folded into the wider D-Day accounting, a statistical annex in a war that produces casualties by the thousand every week. But the official narrative that accompanies those numbers will carry a strange omission. The report tells a story, and the story, as it reaches the public, is almost silent. By August 1944, the truth about Exercise Tiger is sitting on a newsstand, available for a few cents. Stars and Stripes runs a short press release from SHAEF that states the parameters of a D-Day rehearsal in April and an encounter with enemy naval forces in the English Channel. And it gives a number: 639 American dead. Now, you look at that figure and you think of Admiral Moon's internal count of 749, and the discrepancy is 110 human beings, which is not a rounding error. It is an undercount that historians have described as a convenient forgetting, not a deliberate conspiracy, but something more mundane, a vast bureaucracy releasing a partial truth because no one pressed hard enough for the whole of it. The press release acts as a release valve. The war goes on, the Allies sweep through France, and the newspaper pages fill with larger headlines. So who notices a small paragraph on an inner page announcing casualties from a rehearsal that happened 4 months earlier? Almost nobody. The secret does not need a vault. It only needs the noise of a world war to render one paragraph invisible. And yet the release exists, and that is the part that gets you. It is not suppressed or stamped into oblivion. It is printed, distributed, and left in plain view, a document that technically satisfies the requirement of transparency, while omitting the true weight of what happened in the water. The 110 names that do not appear in the public tally remain suspended in the gap between what the commanders knew and what the public was told. The secret was hidden in plain sight, but for the commanders, there was no such invisibility. And the commanders did see. Admiral Don P. Moon had pushed back H-hour and had watched his rehearsal fracture into friendly fire before the German torpedoes even arrived. Now the August heat presses down on Naples, where he is planning another amphibious operation with the same meticulous drive. On August 5th, 1944, Moon excused himself from a meeting, returned to his quarters, and took his own life. The Navy attributed it to battle fatigue. He was survived by his wife and 4 children and was buried at Arlington, and the French government later awarded him the Legion of Honor posthumously. How much of his death the record can lay at the door of Exercise Tiger, no one can say. The causes of a suicide cannot be parceled out so neatly. What the record shows is that Moon had delayed H-hour, had watched the friendly fire unfold, and had commanded through the disaster and its sealing in the weeks before he died. Whatever the full weight on him, Slapton Sands was part of what he carried. Now Bradley. Lieutenant General Omar N. Bradley observes the exercise from shore and sees only the chaos on the beach, not the LSTs gutted out in the channel, and what he sees is poor performance. So he blames the brigade commander, Colonel Eugene M. Caffey, and Bradley is a man who acts on what he sees. He temporarily replaces Caffey with Brigadier General James E. Wharton for the Normandy landings. An engineer officer commanding engineers, swapped out weeks before the largest amphibious assault in history because his superior watched a botched rehearsal and drew a straight line from the smoke to the man in charge. Caffey had not caused the friendly fire, and he had not sent the convoy in a straight line without zigzagging. Caffey had not frozen the radio frequencies or left the life preserver manuals in their crates on the dock, yet he takes the fall, and that is how command cascades. The same brigade loses 413 men in the water, 16 more are wounded, and the man who led them is removed for what looked, from the wrong angle, like incompetence. Bradley's decision is not malice, but the logic of a general who needs the Utah beach landings to work, and who will not gamble on a commander whose unit just came apart, even if the reasons for that collapse lay far outside the colonel's control. The disaster consumed its architects, but out of the wreckage, hard-won changes were forced through that would save thousands. The two radios in Portsmouth can't share a frequency because their circuits are tuned to different slices of the spectrum, a design flaw ignored until men drowned in Lime Bay. So when HMS Azalea tries to warn Convoy T4 that E-boats are closing, the signal goes nowhere, and the torpedoes land before any warning can reach the LSTs. After the disaster, the frequencies are unified, and before June, every vessel retunes to a single band, a fix that saves more lives than any weapon. But the radio is only the first correction. The standard issue life preserver drowns a man if he straps it around his waist, because the buoyancy flips him face down, and the cold water does the rest. A man stays alert for only 15 or 20 minutes, enough to panic, too short for rescue if no one is searching. In April, soldiers got a hurried briefing, not a drill. They buckled the jackets however they thought they went. Now, in the marshalling camps, that changes. Recruits practice donning the jacket until the straps settle across the chest, a muscle memory ritual that keeps a head above the surface when the sea tries to swallow him. The answer to the cold is to get a man out before it kills him. The third lesson is simple: pull survivors from the water fast and keep rescue boats nearby, so that on D-Day, when landing craft hit sandbars and men went into deep water, rescue was closer at hand. The soldiers heading for the beaches don't know the Exercise Tiger name. They strap their life jackets correctly, wait for the ramp, and when the riptide pulls men into deep water, with the radio net clear and rescue boats closing, men who'd have drowned in April are hauled aboard. AGI fastens his preserver across his chest, never knowing his survival was bought in Lime Bay. But the cost of that lesson stays hidden long afterward. The silence holds for years. The D.D. Sherman tank lies on the seabed off Slapton Sands, its hull slowly corroding in the cold channel water after sinking on April 28, 1944, during the Exercise Tiger rehearsals. The tank, a D.D. Sherman, is one of the amphibious vehicles that foundered that night, its flotation screens unable to cope with the heavy swell of Lime Bay. The wreck of LST-507, now a protected site under British law, lies in deep water, but the smaller remains of the Rehearsal stay scattered and out of sight, and no marker tells the story on the beach, and the disaster remains a footnote in classified files remembered by only a handful of aging veterans and local fishermen. And in 1984, local resident Ken Small decides to find the tank, locates it on the seabed, and raises it with a salvage operation. When the tank surfaces, its turret and gun are still intact, the barrel pointing forward as it did on the night it sank, and the rust-streaked hull reveals decades of silence. Now the tank stands on a concrete pad at Torcross, its rusted hull facing the channel, a silent marker that no one officially commissioned, and for years it remains the sole monument to the 749 men lost. Small puts no plaque. The tank simply stands. Visitors who stumble across it can walk up and touch the corroded steel. So one man's obsession pulls a secret from the deep. Official acknowledgement is only a matter of time. And for years after the tank was raised, it stood as the only physical marker. But slowly other memorials appeared. A plaque at Arlington National Cemetery listed the names of the Army dead, while a memorial in Mexico, Missouri honored the men who died in Exercise Tiger. And by the early 21st century, annual services drew veterans' families to Slapton Sands each April, where they read the names aloud, the list growing longer each year as more men were confirmed. How do you measure a loss that stayed hidden for so long? And on the 75th anniversary, hundreds of volunteers pressed 749 boot prints into the wet sand at low tide, each print a hollow that filled with seawater as the tide came in. You could walk the line of prints and see the exact number stretched across the beach. Each one a life the sea would soon reclaim. The installation lasted only hours before the waves erased it, but photographs carried the image far beyond Devon, reaching people who had never heard of Exercise Tiger and fixing the anniversary in public memory. And out in Lime Bay, the wreck of LST-507, which had settled on the seabed in 1944, now rests under legal protection as a war grave. And that designation, like the tank and the boot prints, marks a shift from long quiet to recognition. The dead were finally named, and the years of silence cracked open, but the starkest comparison had yet to be spoken aloud. 749 dead, the final inventory of Exercise Tiger. Set against the operation it was meant to rehearse, the inventory reveals a hard contrast. On June 6, 1944, the 4th Infantry Division landed at Utah Beach with 21,000 men fighting through surf and sandbags against scattered German resistance. The division's after-action report lists 197 casualties, wounded and dead together. The rehearsal in Lime Bay 2 months earlier had already killed 749 Americans before the first assault wave of D-Day even left port. And of those 749, 551 were Army troops training to hit a beach, while 198 were Navy sailors manning the landing ships that were supposed to get them there. Another 200 men were pulled from the cold channel, wounded but alive, hauled into rescue boats by sailors who could not yet grasp the scale of the loss. Those survivors carried shrapnel and frostbite into the next morning, and eventually into old age, with the knowledge that their rehearsal had bled more than the real thing. They went home, but the news blackout lasted until August, when SHAEF released a press notice citing 639 dead, an undercount that cut 110 men from the official record. What emerges from that night, once you strip away the friendly fire, the hypothermia and the incompatible radio frequencies, is a training accident magnified by the systemic failures that created it, and a grim record. Exercise Tiger killed more Americans than the landing at Utah Beach itself. And for years afterward, that comparison sat in plain sight, rarely mentioned beside the triumph of D-Day. The blackout had concealed both a disaster and a record. The tank still sits on the shingle at Slapton Sands, its steel scarred by salt and tide, waves rolling over its tracks and pulling back as if asking if it will still be there. And most people who stop don't know 749 men drowned a few miles from this shore. For years after April 1944, the story was held down, the survivors ordered to say nothing to their families. The invasion's success demanded total discretion. A single intercepted message could have revealed the landing zone. So the dead were counted and filed in reports that stayed sealed until August 1944, when SHAEF released a press notice listing 639 dead, quietly buried beside the D-Day casualty returns. But even then, the official figure was wrong. 639, not 749. You could walk this beach for decades and never brush against what happened. The only reminder, this tank, hauled from the seabed in 1984 by a man who refused to let the story sink. For years, it was the only memorial they had, unplanned and undedicated, a blunt reminder that the price of holding the truth down can be forgetting. So who remembers them beyond the families who never got an explanation, and fewer veterans still making the pilgrimage to this Devon coast? And on the 75th anniversary, volunteers pressed 749 boot prints into the sand, each one a placeholder for a life the invasion's triumph left behind. The tide washes them away, of course, but the tank remains. They trained to liberate a continent. They died in a secret that outlived them. They deserve to be remembered.